Ready to stop spinning your wheels and start moving your business forward? You're in the right place. On each episode of Accelerate to Achieve, we'll discuss a crucial step in the journey, offering tips and advice that you can apply immediately within your own company. From financial management to customer success to digital transformation, we'll cover it all while providing leadership lessons from top industry insiders. In just 15 minutes, you'll be inspired to build momentum through action and achieve incredible results. Welcome to Accelerate to Achieve, the podcast that moves you from question to answer and idea to execution.
Hello, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Accelerate to Achieve podcast Spotlight Series. I'm your host, Ryan Walter, the founder of Parrels Advisory. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but Steve Jobs didn't create the iPhone. While he certainly played a critical role mustering Apple to develop something new, thousands of individuals each played a part in creating the best iPod ever made. What mattered was his ability to get a result, not whether he came up with all the ideas that ended up in the final product. Now, today, Megan Robinson has joined us. And as the principal at eLeader Experience, she works with individuals and teams to develop self-leadership skills that grow companies. Megan believes that leadership should be approachable for everyone, regardless of title, position, or experience. Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to this and can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Ryan. I am thrilled for this conversation as well.
So you've had a successful career with a variety of senior roles. What led you to pivot in this direction?
It was funny. I was actually asking myself this question yesterday with my husband, saying, how often does your career really shift? And it's happening more and more frequently right now. So really for me, I was down a marketing path for the first for the first part of my career. And I wanted that since I was 13 years old. It's kind of that freak that said, "Ooh, 13-year-old Megan wants to be the VP of marketing." And through that experience, through gaining leadership, through gaining expertise, through being the entrepreneur in the Fortune 500 companies, you really learn about what you love doing on the day-to-day, where your skills are and what really sings to you. And so as I went through that journey and really understanding, getting a lot of feedback, having to make a lot of tough decisions and really growing myself, I found I was really passionate about what I call business therapy. And that's the name I coined at the time, but really being able to talk with other business leaders, really collaborate with them on solving problems that were bigger than just what marketing does, because we're a completely integrated system these days where every single department, every single action really affects the whole business. And when you get it right, it's bigger than the sum of its parts. And so when I really looked into coaching and really formalizing some of that business therapy practices, it really took me down this coaching direction, and particularly understanding what my journey was as a young leader, as, if I may say, a high performer and high potential, not having a lot of that coaching support around me, and looking around and saying, who are the leaders that I admire? And what are the roles that I see myself in? And not getting a lot of answers. And so, like you mentioned in that intro, I'm so focused on building that self-leadership, empowering people to really define leadership for themselves earlier, and to build up the skill set so that they can take their ideas, their visions, their intentions, and create something bigger and be able to really get groundswell for it and buy-in and to see it to the end.
So you were talking a little bit there about that missing component, right? Who do I have to look to? As you begin to think through, or you were thinking through how you might go about addressing that, were there particular or specific gaps you felt were really missing that absolutely needed to be addressed, that would definitely be, critical for individuals and companies as you began to look across that kind of whole spectrum of everything?
Oh my gosh. I will never forget the day that I went to my manager at the time, and I was dealing with a team member that I didn't know how to handle the situation. I knew there was a gap. I knew things weren't working. I was trying to go to my manager to understand, how do I solve this problem? What do I do in this case? And the question I posed to her was, can you teach critical thinking? Because I knew how to think critically at the time. I saw this gap between what wasn't happening and what needed to happen. And I didn't know, as a young leader, as a young manager, I didn't know how to teach and encourage and coach these skills in others. And so that manager told me, yes, you can teach critical thinking. Yes, you can develop this. And then proceeded to not tell me how. And I think there's this gap in figuring out how to do these things, because we all know what we should be doing. We all have kind of some ideas of what we may want to be doing, but how we get there is just this mystery where people spin in anxiety and spin in frustration and don't know how to get themselves out of it. So I see that being a huge gap. I see leadership style shifting. I see people identifying, that's the type of leader I don't want to be, or reading about idealistic leaders or great leaders and saying that is who I want to be. But I love that you opened with Steve Jobs, an incredible leader in some rights, but I also don't know if his tactics and style would function in today's environment and would still be as thought of as positively, or if he would have burnt out his team by now.
I do think the term totalitarian despot might have been thrown his way once or twice. So yes, I think depending on who you're talking to and when you caught them in the cycle, that may have come from their.
But we continue to idealize them, right? We continue to talk about them and pretend that they were, I mean, even Churchill's another fantastic leader, completely different time, but you hear that totalitarian and what we really revered or still do look up to, and then realize that we can't mimic that. We can't use those same tools or techniques, and it won't function in the same way. So as we're really going through redefining leadership and understanding how we want to show up as leaders, we don't have a ton of models for that. And that how do we do it and what does that look like really gets lost in that leadership development process. So that's where I see that gap, is with those younger leaders as you start stepping into those roles.
So I think I'd like to dive into stepping into those roles for those maybe for the first time. Often you're moving from individual contributor to that first level supervisor, manager, whatever it may be. What's that mind shift need to be there? Because perhaps who you were, how you were measured, what you needed to do now changes. What are you trying to help people with? What are you seeing there? Where does that mind shift need to go?
I think the biggest opportunity is actually with a bit of a time audit and reflecting of how are you going to spend your time and how should you be spending your time? Because how you get graded for performance or what success looks like isn't measured on those individual contributions. And when you look at how you're spending your time, if you're trying to still spend all of your time on those individual efforts, and I see a lot of people getting trapped into, well, what should I be doing? And again, not knowing, where does that time go? What does it look like to spend time managing? What does it look like to spend time leading? And how do you create new benchmarks for it? So I see quite a few first-time managers and leaders, and particularly right now, and the middle managers are the most squeezed because they do have some individual contribution requirements and needs from them, while they're also supposed to be spending that time leading and managing it. So getting a lot of clarity around, what are you doing in that activity? Are you managing? Are you leading? Or are you doing? Is oftentimes a light bulb moment for people. Really, really redefining those different buckets of time. How about you, Ryan?
No, I think you're right. I think the other thing too, and this is where I have often, whether it's advised or talked to folks, is that switch in how you measure success. Right? It's that ability to measure on the result of the team versus the result of yourself. And if you can start doing that, I think it can help you with, okay, now where do I need to spend my time? I know for me personally, there was a point I was leading a very large group of people. And I said to someone, they said, well, you're spending a lot of time working with everybody else. I said, well, if I can empower 1,000 people, they can outperform me 1,000,000-fold than anything I can do by myself, right? Just the power of that many people together. And I think a little bit of an extreme example, that to me, if you can move yourself to understand what's the bigger goal, where do we need to go? How do I start enabling this team, this group to achieve that? You almost begin to set your mind on a path that lets you start making those decisions versus, well, how do I change? Because that's less about the change and it's more about the result of that team.
Well, I love that it's the result of the project. It's not the result of your time. It's not the result of your effort. It's not the result of your specific contribution, or the tasks that you accomplished. It's, did we get this project done? What was the result of the project? How do we make the project better, faster, stronger, more productive, more cost efficient, more profitable? And when you start looking at those types of metrics or goals, you see a lot more of what needs to be done, or how you can affect change, or how you can make it even better or produce bigger results or impact. So when you are I took on a leadership role last year with a struggling organization. And I looked at everything that needed to be done in all of the different departments, and looking to manage and lead to some much bigger metrics than just the tiny little things, or how many emails I could send out, or who needed to connect to who, create a lot more impact. And even allowing people to do that minutia work and giving them that space and permission to succeed with it, and really encouraging it to happen takes a lot of effort. And I think that's the biggest gap as you make those first jumps, is that takes effort and time. It takes time to manage someone. It takes time to lead them in a new direction. Just because you know it doesn't mean they do. And that component is often underestimated, I think, earlier, and undervalued earlier, where it's deprioritized because it feels easier to do it yourself.
So I'd love to sort of take this story to, in my mind, what is kind of the next level. And that is, as I talk to a lot of new, mid-level managers, the one thing I'm often hearing is they really struggle to gain traction for their ideas and to find support for them. Why do you think it's so hard for them to be heard at times, or, make what they have to offer a part of the conversation?
I think it's often a positioning and a gap of awareness, where when you are so focused in what you're doing or where your priorities are, that elevating to a larger need, a larger goal, a larger problem, unless you're able to position it that way, everyone else is focusing on that and you're really behind. And oftentimes when you're in that position, it feels like you're sounding the alarm, and you're you're trying to tell everyone that something's at risk or in jeopardy, or that you need something. And instead of being able to really connect it to those bigger elements or those bigger business, you're stuck in the spot that you are. So I always encourage that bigger position. How can you think of something in a bigger perspective and take that into consideration? Because that's what really everyone else is caring about as you move up, as you move across, even just getting other traction from other departments, and really looking at how can you align yourself with what those objectives are, and making sure that you're connecting instead of contrasting and taking away, where I find a lot of people want to kind of take away from something, or feel like they're going down a wormhole, or the minutia of it, instead of adding to something bigger.
It's interesting. As you were talking, I go back to something I often think about, and this goes straight back to your background. We always talk about managing your manager and influencing without authority, right? And for me, in marketing and sales, right, we're always trying to understand our customer. We're always trying to understand what drives them and what moves them, and how do they make a purchasing decision? How do they decide where they're going to spend the money? And we forget that we work with humans, all of whom have priorities and challenges and things they're trying to deal with. And as you're trying to move something forward, to your point of the kind of your limited perspective or wherever you're coming from, understanding that there are factors and things driving everybody else. So if you're not going to take that into account and you're not going to work to understand that, you're trying to sell an idea, just like I'm trying to sell, a book from Amazon, right? And I think that's where the time going in to understand those folks and what's driving them and what's important can really help. And I think relationships matter too. If you're seen as someone who's a true partner and is interested in broader success, not just their own success, you build that credibility up over time. And when you have something to say, they listen, right? It's like, oh, I know so-and-so's here and they're always trying to come in and do what's right for the organization. And they're interested in it. They're not coming to me just when they need something. Now, all of a sudden, they've got something. I'll give them 15 minutes to hear them out because I know they're always there. I just think it's part of building up that foundation of relationship and trust too, that really kind of can carry that forward.
I agree 1,000,000%. It's that fundamental influence that you're building up at whatever level, whether it's just influence or trust or relationship with your manager, cross-functional teams, senior leadership, even with your team. And I think that sales perspective is very much forgotten. And it's forgotten in young leaders because they think, oh, well, this must be important, that this matters to everyone. And they make those blind assumptions with it. And so when you really start thinking of how can I sell in this idea? How can I align it to a bigger picture? How can I take their perspective, their wants, their pains, their needs, and align it to the idea? You get much quicker buy-in from people. And I think that's the miss is sometimes when you have these ideas, you're not looking for buy-in, you're looking for accolade. And accolades aren't going to move the needle. Accolades nobody cares about. But when you get that buy-in, you're actually able to create traction for an idea. And so I talk a lot about kind of that dark side of leadership, which is that sales side. And you're really selling that idea up just as much as you're selling that idea down. If you are a leader and you have a team, you've got to get that buy-in from them. I always say vision applies by the 80-20% rule, where it's 80% of that vision's coming from that leader, but 20% is coming from and that 80-20 principle applies so strongly with this because you need that buy-in. You need to be able to sell that vision to get that 20% commitment, to get that 20% refinement so that it actually happens. Otherwise, you've just got this beautiful vision and no team behind you. And that doesn't really make great leadership, as it turns out. You got to have some followers.
Well, I'd like to jump straight down into making sure it happens, right? We kind of referenced this earlier and you just came to it here. It all kind of boils down to getting things done within your team, right? And achieving goals that are set out. And often for managers, without their team support, the chances of what you want occurring are very slim, right? The likelihood you're going to be able to do it all on your own is very small if the team's not behind you. So let's turn the lens on the employee perspective. What do managers need to be thinking about when it comes to employees to make them successful and to be successful, right? I know you started touching on it a little bit more here around like understanding the vision and being in 80-20, but let's take it down a couple more layers. What do they need to be thinking about? What's critical?
I think it's the lack of listening that is really a core issue right now. And I love that we're talking about that employee perspective, even what that employee experiences. And we've been in a bit of a talent crisis, I'll say, for a little bit. So it's getting more and more traction, and it's getting more and more weight as part of the conversation, as part of the needs of leaders and the consideration set for leaders. And I think that typically boils down to the ability to listen. And great leaders are able to listen to others really effectively and make sure that they feel heard and incorporate the best parts of those insights. And I know you've been consulting for a while, and I always feel that the best consultants, and I've heard story and story again, where they'll just interview the entire team. They'll interview tons and tons of people from the organization and put back findings and recommendations that are completely sourced internally. And it's because no one took the time or energy to listen. No one was engaged or desired to hear those perspectives. And so I find that so much is getting lost by the inability to have two-way dialogue. And a lot of traditional leadership models, or a lot of older ways of looking at it, are very top down. And being able to flip the script and being able to be inclusive in that perspective and listening to everyone is where you get a lot of that magic. That's where you get that employee engagement that everyone's craving right now. That's where you get the buy-in from the team. That's where you get new ideas and grow as an organization.
Well, thank you for calling out our dark secret that there's very little new information that we ever hand out. But I subscribe to the same thing, and I'll reverse your 80-20. If you're not spending 80% of your time listening and only 20% talking at most, you're not doing your job. So I think it's spot on there.
It's actually making this conversation very uncomfortable. I feel like I'm doing 80% of the talking.
Well, don't worry about it. Nobody wants to listen to me anyway, so it's all good. The last thing I'd like to touch on, as we're talking here, is your boss. Everybody has one. No matter where you are, almost guaranteed you've got a boss. A lot of people are stuck in a situation where they feel like their boss's vision, it's about as clear as mud. And they're really hesitant to do anything because the compass just seems to keep spinning in circles. What advice do you have for them? What recommendations would you give someone?
Ooh, that's a tricky one, because you've got to read the situation a little bit more clear. And I would say to slowly build clarity and to gently approach the situation, because it depends on your boss's style. And if it's clear as mud, it may be clear as mud for you, but it's absolutely crystal clear for them. So that's one way to approach it, of how do you pull out that information? How do you have some of that curiosity and just continue to hone in on what that is? But more likely, they actually don't have a vision and it's not clear for them either. And so in those situations, which is much more likely, right? And if you start questioning it too much, they get defensive because they feel that they should have it all figured out, or they're pretending, or they're posturing with it, or they're feeling called out because they don't have something there. So I always look at, how can you make conversations and dialogue collaborative? How can you spend some time getting small pieces of clarity that build up to bigger ones? And so it's typically through really gentle question asking, really subtle collaboration opportunities, and either creating them yourself, asking your boss for some of that time or energy, or trying to co-create something and kind of guide them through that process so that you have what you need. And even being clear about what it is that you need. And if you're not getting what you need, how that's hurting or harming you or the work in really impactful ways. So again, it typically comes into, how do you raise the alarm? How do you get that attention and focus on something? And typically being able to gently ask those questions of, how does this fit into a bigger picture? Or what are our top priorities? Or, hey, this is something that you said last week. How does it apply here? And really making sure that you're pulling those pieces out. Because most likely it's clear as mud for them just as much as it is for you. So I would say be very gentle, but also keep pushing for it.
It's funny. There's two things I think about there. And I loved how you talked about the clarity, but slowly building it up. One of the tips I've always told folks is, if you can, try to, propose little scenarios that validate, is this what you're looking for? Oh, if I was thinking about this, would that help you get there? Because it allows them to almost begin creating those edges. I always talk about, it's like having, dust on a picture, or it's dark and you're starting to shine a light in different sections to begin understanding the outline and that. And I think, just going that layer deeper to what you said, that's so critical. The more you can kind of make it real and situational, I think it's better, because they can start drawing that out. The other thing I've also found that's helpful is trying to understand, what are they hoping this thing accomplishes? right? So they may say, well, we're doing this because we want to do A, B, and C with revenue and have this, this, and this. And then you start to, oh, okay, so I can ignore half of what I was thinking because that has nothing to do with revenue, right? Where is this going? What's that goal? How is it going to help things? I've always found as little tips and tricks you can use to your point, has to be the right person. Not everybody wants to go through that and things. And you do have to, build up on that. And I think there's also other colleagues and people who are out there who might have done things. And to your point, there will not be most likely an immediate answer. It'll take time to build things up, but you got to chip away at it.
Well, I love what you said is, that kind of, start with why, or trying to find, ask that 7 layers of why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it? And I don't love why questions all the time, but what are we hoping to achieve by this? And what are we hoping to achieve by that? And, what's important about that? Or how does that fit in the priority compared to something else? But instead of asking sometimes those really open-ended questions, it can help by painting some specific pictures or giving people choices. Is this what you're looking for? Or is this what you're looking for? Or here's 3 different ways that we could attack it. Which one's most important? And kind of giving those brainstorming options so that you're getting clarity. And as soon as you're able to have a vision for what your piece is or what you see for it, then you can kind of bounce it against that person. This is what I see. Is that what you're seeing as well? Or is it different? Or how is it different? Or what pieces look different? So you're getting more specific, but you got to have something to react to often. And trying to ask someone to pull it out of thin air when they don't have that clarity, you'll just get stuck with dead faces and a lot of ums.
Megan, I really want to thank you for joining us today. And before we go, is there anything you'd like to say for those interested in learning more?
Thank you. This has been a lovely conversation. Really, my biggest message is just however you can show up as a leader in your current role, in your current responsibilities is a win. And everyone has that potential. Every individual contributor can show up as a leader just as much as every CEO. And it doesn't take the title in order to do it, but it does take intention and practice.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening today. And again, thank you, Megan. And I hope everyone's enjoyed this latest edition in our Spotlight series. I look forward to joining you all on the next episode. Until then, I'm Ryan Walter. And remember that solving your biggest business problems begins when you decide to accelerate your approach and achieve more.
At Parrels Advisory, our focus is your business's future. Having the right insight, experience, and perspective makes all the difference when tackling far-reaching issues within your company. We are here to simplify the steps, unlock your potential, and move you forward, making your vision a reality. We've helped startups achieve massive growth, mid-sized businesses navigate digital transformation, and enterprises embrace innovation. Wondering how to jumpstart your business and move it forward? Contact us to discuss your audacious goals during a complimentary consultation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Accelerate to Achieve. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen. Got a question, feedback on the program, or interested in being a guest? Simply go to parrels.co/A2A-podcast and send us a message. To learn more about our work or to book a consultation, visit us at parrels.co/contact. Until next time, remember that solving your biggest business problems begin when you decide to accelerate your approach and achieve more.